All right, so I wanted to make this presentation / workshop as interactive as possible. So I wanted to start with this question. Which strategies have you used to foster student engagement in your online classes? Or which issues have you encountered with student engagement in online classes? So based on what I've seen, some of you may have never taught online, but anyway, I'm going to send you to a breakout room, okay? So if you never taught, just listen to the conversation. And yeah, feel free to talk or not about this, or just like get to know each other. But I think it could be like good to hear from everyone's experience before starting my presentation. All right. So I'm sending you to a breakout room of like maybe 3 or 4 people, and I'll call you back in about 5 minutes. All right. See you then. And don't hesitate to raise your hands if you have any issues. Okay. Thank you. All right, I guess everyone is back, almost back.
Yeah, I had to change computers. The other connection was terrible. Je n'entendais rien du tout.
All right. All right. So yeah, if anyone wants to share with us like your strategies or the issues you had, like that would be nice.
Well, we were discussing in our group how, of course, we use breakout rooms kind of to have students practice whatever we're covering, but we have the disadvantage of not being able to see or hear what they're doing, so we don't know if they're sticking to the target language or not. So obviously there is an accountability piece after. I usually have them write something or fill out something to make sure that they're using or doing what they're supposed to do. But you know, breakout room has a lot of
Yeah.
problems too.
No, for sure, and that's like yeah. All right, well, thank you. I guess yeah, I'm going to start. So the strategy I used was basically to try and reduce the feeling of social isolation that you might experience in online classes by systematizing social interactions through collaborative tasks. So this notion of collaborative tasks, basically, I already used them in person class. And then when the COVID crisis happened and that we had to move to online classes kind of abruptly, I decided to systematize them all over. Okay, so it was more at an advanced level, but in my elementary and intermediate levels, I already kind of like use this approach of collaborative tasks. So the goal of this workshop is the why and how of systematizing collaborative tasks in foreign language courses, online or in person for that matter. So I'm going to provide you with a bit of pedagogy theoretical background to understand the why. Then I will focus on collaborative listening, reading, writing, and speaking tasks respectively. All right, so let's start with a bit of pedagogy background. So first, who took the online, the training for on how to teach online courses? Okay. So you might remember there was a paper that addressed this issue that highlighted the crucial role of social interaction to ensure student engagement in online courses. And there is this framework called the communicative inquiry, which is basically used now as a reference to ensure both students' engagement and success in online courses. So to ensure the best educational experience possible, a community of inquiry requires three main components: social presence, a cognitive presence, and a teaching presence. So by social presence, it means that the students need to feel that they belong to a community, so the class, but also they need to develop interpersonal relationships. Cognitive presence implies that students have to construct meaning through reflection and discourse. And finally, teaching presence means that there should be a structure and a process to help students reach the learning outcome set for the course. This community of inquiry is part of Vygotskyan's social-cultural theory of mind. I don't know if you're familiar with, with his research, but basically he emphasizes the importance of verbal interaction for learning. Basically, learning occurs through social interaction. And he mentions the development of specific cognitive functions such as voluntary attention, intentional memory, and language learning as something that is socially situated. So it only happens through social interaction. All right. Swain, I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's a specialist in second language acquisition. Developed this notion of languaging as in the framework of social cultural theory. Are you all familiar with Krashen's comprehensible input theory? Yes. Okay. So Swain said that the comprehensible input theory, so for those who don't know, it means that you can learn a language only through exposure that you can understand. But Swain said there are a lot of students in French immersion schools in Canada who were exposed to a lot of French, but still they didn't have a native speaker ability. They made a lot of mistakes when they spoke, when they wrote. So she came up with this model of comprehensible output hypothesis, saying that basically to be able to acquire the language, you need to be exposed to the language, but also to produce it step by step. She refined her model with a pushed output theory, meaning that you have to focus more on accuracy. And finally, she came up with this concept of languaging, which is basically using language to make sense of information or to perform a complex task. So you might know that as metalinguistic discourse. Basically, when you ask yourself, oh, what does this word mean again? Or how was the rule again? Do we put the adjective before or after? That is an example of languaging. So languages can be either private speech, you talk to yourself about what to do, what it means, or can happen through collaborative dialogue. And Swain has shown that it works better when you go through collaborative dialogue. So all in all, in online language classes, collaborative tasks appear to be the best solution to create a community of inquiry. Why? Because it can foster social interactions between students. Students are engaged at all times because they have to collaborate with their peers and they feel also less isolated. Then it fosters cognitive presence through languaging, again, and it also helps language acquisition. And then it fosters such a presence through a systematic structured process. It's about always the same idea, the same format when you do collaborative tasks. Okay. All right, so let's start with collaborative listening. And as I told you, it's going to be kind of interactive. So feel free to participate or not in the activity online, but I'm going to play an audio document twice before I send you to breakout room. Okay, it's in Dutch because it's close enough to English. So trying to, does anyone speak Dutch, by the way? No, okay. So based on what you understand, try to guess what this video is about. Okay, so just the audio. I'm not going to show you the video, it will be too easy. But so based on what you understand, on the cognates you recognize, try to guess what it means. So I'm going to play it twice, send you to a breakout room, discuss with your partners, and then I'll call you back and I'll play it a third time. And then we'll talk about the experience to know what you think about this. Okay. All right, so let me play this audio document now.
Welkom bij een nieuwe video. In deze video...
Can you hear it well? Yes? Okay, so let's start over.
Hey allemaal, welkom bij een nieuwe video. In deze video ga ik jullie laten zien hoe je in een paar simpele stappen de Marokkaanse begereer maakt. Oftewel, de Marokkaanse pannenkoeken met duizenden gaatjes. Laten we beginnen. Je hebt het volgende nodig: griesmeel, bloem, vanillesuiker, gist, zout, bakpoeder en lauw warm water.
Okay,
welkom bij een
one more time. Okay, and then I send you to breakout room for 1 minute or so.
Nieuwe video. In deze video ga ik jullie laten zien hoe je in een paar simpele stappen de Marokkaanse begereer maakt. Oftewel, de Marokkaanse pannenkoeken met duizenden gaatjes. Laten we beginnen. Je hebt het volgende nodig: griesmeel, bloem, vanillesuiker, gist, zout, bakpoeder en lauw warm water.
All right, see you in 1 minute and a half, let's say. All right.
No idea.
So that was quick, I guess, maybe too quick. I don't know if you had a chance to talk, but
We did.
I heard in this video,
good.
and that was it.
I know, yeah. We're not talking.
That was the extent of my cognates there. Is it a map?
Oh, no.
Is it colors?
No.
Smell, some kind of smell or taste.
Close enough, yeah. Closer, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good job, Lynn.
All right, so I'm gonna play it for the last time. I think everyone is back. Yeah, we're gonna wait. All right, so I'm gonna play it for the last time, okay? And then we'll talk about like your experience and what you thought about the interaction you had with the others. All right.
Hey allemaal, welkom bij een nieuwe video. In deze video ga ik jullie laten zien hoe je in een paar simpele stappen de Marokkaanse begeleer maakt. Oftewel, de Marokkaanse pannenkoeken met duizenden gaatjes. Laten we beginnen. Je hebt het volgende nodig: griesmeel, bloem, vanillesuiker, gist, zout, bakpoeder en lauw warm water.
Okay. All right. So, what do you think the theme was? What cognates did you recognize?
I think it's someone showing how to cook something, how to make something.
Yes. Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Yeah, because
do you recognize any words? But basically,
yeah, salt,
Salt,
blue,
yeah.
Salt,
salt, yeah.
Water.
Yeast,
water at the,
yeast, yeah. Water.
I thought it was
Yeast,
talking
yeah, I
about
think I heard
odors. Yes, okay.
So it's basically like Moroccan pancake. Like for some reason that.
yeah, I heard the word Moroccan, but I thought, oh, I'm biased. I'm just going there straight because. So,
Now let's talk about the experience. When you talked in the breakout room, like, did you think it helped you? Like, tell me, like, what you experienced, what you thought about this interaction.
yeah, the exchange was useful. I mean, I said it was very humbling because I hope our students don't feel that way.
And that's exactly the main point of like what collaborative listening. The students realize that they all have trouble sometimes understanding like a text. So that is humbling for sure. Whether like anything that helped you better understand when you came back and I played it for the last time? No?
I thought about the recipe at the last time, or the third listening, the third round.
Yeah, oh, okay, all right.
No, I found that I dug in on what I thought it was. Like once I thought I had an understanding, I was like, no, that's it. Now I can't listen to anything differently because it's going to change what I thought it was.
Interesting. Yes,
So
right.
in our group, we talked about the structure, right? That and how important that is, like the listing, right? Which is of course a basic skill for listening comprehension, right? For the novice, they can understand lists, but I think that structure lends itself then to meaning, right? Like how do we categorize that? What kind of presentation would require listing, right? And then it cognitively goes to ingredients, and then you start, it's fascinating the way you make those the synapses, right? They're making those connections. But I think the structure.
And thank you so much for that, because it's it's like for saying that, because basically that's the main point of like, sorry, let me find it again up. Okay. So indeed, so listening is a set of soft skills, and like when you mentioned, like right now, Roxanne is, for instance, like relying on the format of the document to know what it could mean. Okay, so and that's why you activate what we call metacognitive discourse around these soft skills, saying, hey, wait a minute, the format, what do you think it could mean? So that's why collaborative listening, that is, instead of like doing that as a silent activity, students just listen and just like, you know, with their own anxiety, they just, you know, share what they understood, what they didn't understand. Sometimes they don't understand anything. And that's a way to reassure them. So studies, mainly by RD, have shown the benefits of collaborative listening. So first, you verbalize your understanding and difficulties, as we already talked about. You can also share strategies. you know. And finally, it's been shown that it increased listening comprehension skill overall as compared to regular listening skills on your own. All right, so here is a concrete example of how I would structure a collaborative listening task. So first, for instance, I would ask them to watch the beginning of the video without the sound and get the word you're going to hear. So to anticipate, so they talk with their partner. So I guess in the target language here, it's okay. Then you watch the video and check if you heard the word, and you identify the main theme. So first listening, which is global. Then you listen to the video again and answer a series of questions to work on selective listening comprehension. Finally, listen to the segments on the video and summarize everything you understand to work on detailed comprehension. And finally, you can have I ask them, for instance, to write a comment for this video as a follow-up activity, just so that it's not like purely listening. All right, so let's move on to another type, collaborative reading tasks. So this time, I'm going to ask you to read a text in Western Frisian, which is basically the language that is the closest to English. However, it might be challenging to understand the text. So I'm sending you like a Google Doc, and I'm going to ask you in the breakout room first to read it on your own, and then to go over it again with your partners and try to make sense out of it, okay? Either by recognizing words or whatever. Again, you just have to, let's say, understand most of it, but at least identify the theme. Hopefully you'll be able to. It's not easy, unfortunately. All right, so sending you the link. So please make sure to click on it and open it, and then I'll send you to a breakout room.
Says we need access.
Oh gosh. All right, so let me check.
Charles.
I shared it. So you cannot open it, anyone?
You have to request access.
Oh gosh. Okay. All right. So let me, sorry about that. My mistake. Let me share. Oh gosh, what have I done?
Can you just play it for us again?
Yeah, I have it like here. Sorry guys. I think it will be easier. So let's try again. Tell me if it worked this time. It does. Okay, wonderful. All right. Everyone has it? All good?
Yes,
all right.
thank you.
Sending you to a breakout room now. All right. See you in a couple minutes.
Charles, I'm sorry, I keep being kicked out of the meeting, so maybe you need to assign me to a room again.
Okay, I'm gonna. Three, and I'm gonna put Khadija in 4. All right. I don't know what's going on. It worked? Okay, wonderful. Khadija, ça a marché ou pas?
Oui, 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 c'est bon.
Okay. Isaac, did you have were you sent to a breakout room? No.
I'm not in a breakout room though.
Okay, all right. So let me play around with that. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. It's like the issues with Zoom. Denise, not even work either for you, breakout rooms. All right, never mind.
No.
All right. Yeah. Already issue with Zoom, unfortunately. If it worked so well, it would be better. Okay, I'm gonna call them back. All right, and I'm going. Oh, I'm dumb. I should have anyway. Yeah, I think everyone's coming back. Wonderful. Right. Okay, so were you able to decipher a bit of Western Frisian? Yes. Any idea what the text is about?
Something
About
about
two-
teaching methods or learning.
About two people. There are two names.
And there is something about active interaction as well. Like
Yeah.
population or something.
Okay, so I did like something we should not be doing, but I basically copied the entry article for collaborative learning from Wikipedia, and I used Google Translate to translate it into Western Frisian. So it just about collaborative learning. So
No wonder we couldn't get it. It's nonsense.
Learning.
I know.
Gearworken, I thought was something matching together. Gearworken, it's mentioned several times. So clearly that means collaborative, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so what do you think of the experience? Like when you went over it on your own and when you talked about what it could mean with others? I don't know if you had a chance to do both, but what do you think like collaborative reading can help or anyway?
So I think in our own case, when my partner mentioned like maybe some English looking words, so that gave me like an hint to also look for some other stuff as well, and that was when I saw active interaction. So I think that talking to her sort of kind of like opened my eyes to some words that could actually give hints.
I'm totally not just saying this, but when I said my idea and he agreed, it increased my confidence to look for more words and to just, it actually increased my confidence in my guesses.
Indeed. All right. So yes, Roxanne?
I just wanted to add one thing. I think also when your partner or your group gives you one word, it's fascinating because it's one piece of the puzzle. And suddenly, at least I found that the comprehension started to extend beyond the words, right? So you start generating meaning in larger, larger discourses, right? Longer discourses. So, one word turns into 2 or 3 and it keeps going, you're building, right? But that collaborative, which I assume if you're doing this in class, you would have to have the students discuss it in English, right? They can't.
Yeah, I will talk about, that's question like I'm going to cover. I will talk about that. There's actually a lot of research behind the use of the first language of things. But I guess it also might make it a bit more fun, let's say, because you try to decipher the text together instead of being in your own thoughts and either being stuck or not. But anyway, let's go over what research says. So first of all, you have to understand that collaborative reading, and more specifically collaborative strategic reading, is a general pedagogical framework aimed to improve reading comprehension skills in the first language. Okay, so even for teenagers, it's been proven to work very, very well. Now, and concerning the acquisition of a second language, you should be knowing the use of computer-mediated annotation system works also very well. Have you ever heard of that before? Because it's also something used sometimes in literature. No? Okay, so that's something that is getting more and more popular. So Momtas and Garner show that it improves the reading comprehension skills of all students when you do it in the long term. And then Thoms and Poole also showed that it really improved the understanding of they worked on Hispanic poetry, or Spanish poetry, I should say. And it also helps students better understand literary text. So all in all, it's good from the beginner level to the higher literary classes. So here's an example of what how I would structure, a reading task. So first, for instance, if we read, let's say, a newspaper article, I'm going to ask them to read the title and guess what the text is about, and then to skim the text quickly with a partner to confirm that the theme. So that's part of the anticipation. Then I ask them to read the text out loud in turns and to summarize it. So here we are at the global level. I think having them to read the text out loud, practice pronunciation, and often I either circulate in the breakout rooms, but in class I would circulate all around. And if I hear the same pronunciation mistakes, I would give feedback then and have them do that. And it's also a way to make sure that they do read the text. It might sound like kind of stupid to say that, but I suspect that maybe sometimes students do not really read or just look over because they're not really confident. I know myself, when I studied German, I would not really read the text. So that's why I'm thinking maybe some students do the same in class. Then I ask them to read the text one more and answer the question with a partner, so selective. So basically they have the question, they can go back. And finally, I try to have something more detailed or to work on the implicit of the text at the advanced level, or try to guess vocabulary, the meaning of new vocabulary words, and so on. And finally, I always try to finish with a follow-up activity or question. For instance, do you agree with the author, or give your opinion to make it complete. All right, so now let's talk about what I think is the most efficient and the most important is collaborative writing. So for this activity, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're an English as a second language student at the intermediate level. You have to do an exercise as part of a unit, and the target vocab of the unit is the city, and the target structures the relative pronouns. Here is a topic. Tulane International Office, oops, sorry, I made a mistake, asks you to describe NOLA to future exchange students. With your partner, both write the description. So I'm going to ask you, wherever you want, but in the breakout room, that you all write the exact same thing. You talk about what you should be writing in English. And again, think as intermediate students. So, do you remember the rule? Try to think like what could be an issue for learners of English as a foreign language. All right, all good? Clear for everyone? Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk again about your impressions. All right, thank you. So, sending you again to a breakout room.
Right.
Do you remember the topic, by the way? Yes.
Yeah, NOLA. Describe NOLA to international students.
We're not in break rooms. Breakout.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure before I sent you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Oh, okay.
Charles, you're awesome. This is great.
Good. I thought like, experiencing like could be like a good idea for you to see like, yeah. Okay, so impressions.
It was hard to find.
Brainstorm. It's always good to brainstorm with other people.
Yeah, to brainstorm with other people. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, sorry, I didn't give you a lot of time, but like, yeah,
there are less plurative pronouns in English than in French. I would have preferred to do this in French.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's move on. So I'm just going to talk now a bit more about like the advantage, the benefits of collaborative writing. So research on collaborative writing has demonstrated numerous benefits. So first, I talked about it, languaging. Students talk about form lexicon in what we call in the field language-related episodes, which are basically equivalent to problem-solving tasks. And here, that is important, grammar is used in a concrete context. Okay, it's not like if in the blank, but grammar is applied. We really use grammar, we try to memorize, remember the rule in a concrete context. Here's an example of language-related episode found in Storch. By forcing the students to revising, encouraging would be a nicer word. In the encouraging the students to take the initiative, yeah, great. To take initiative, to start revising, to start a revision, or no, to start revising, no, to start revising. So this example show you that like it's focused on the lexicon, on strategy, on like what it means, on grammar. So that's something that helps each other. It's totally an example. I mean, it's an example, sorry, of what we call scaffolding that is trying to help each other to improve. It showed again in L2 acquisition at all levels and especially in accuracy. Basically, when you spend hours giving some feedback, doing collaborative writing is much more efficient than just giving like the right answer to the students when they write their own compositions in the long run. Know that when I do collaborative writing, I walked around or I browse like the breakout rooms and I give feedback. And it's actually interesting because sometimes you hear like, you realize that students do not really master a grammar point, so you just act accordingly. Now, we mentioned that the use of the first language. Sheng compared two things. He asked students to only use English or then I forgot like, or their first language, I guess was Chinese. And he noticed that like if they used only the first language, there was a higher syntactic complexity of the writing. Everything else was about the same, accuracy, fluency, and everything. So this is something we actually talked about that with the grad students when I had my course meeting in French. I think like, I mean, I do not penalize them if they speak English about grammar and everything. Then it really depends on the task, but there's also been like a lot of research, including Swain, that have shown that the use of L1 can really help them express their ideas about grammar, which is not the case when they speak only the target language. So that's why I think like, in the context of collaborative tasks, saying no English at all might be kind of an issue in the long run.
Can I interrupt, Charles? I was going to ask you about that because my assumption is that all of this is going to take place in the L1 in the context like at Tulane where everybody shares English as their language, and that's okay. I mean, we're supposed to encourage them to try to speak the target language, but they're going to speak.
Let's say, I, for instance, forced it like because we teach that in that advanced French class, I tried, and some of them would play the game. The weaker students would just use English, but I would encourage them to use French. But here's what our end goal: for them to be able to have a better writing and or maybe speaking. Like it really depends, because if it's speaking French for speaking French only, I don't know. That's something I'm kind of torn about, and I understand like the two. And I know it's like very taboo to use the first language in a language classroom, but again, what is a final outcome?
I don't think it's taboo, but I was curious about your position on it, because for me, the default assumption is going to be they're going to do this exercise in English, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's still worth they're still going to get enough out of it that it's okay to do that. And I'd like to know, if I'm going to do these kinds of exercises, what should I be expecting? Because to try to force them to speak French in our case, I don't think it's going to happen. So.
I mean, yeah, Roxanne, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, because this is something I've thought long and hard about, and we discuss it in my pedagogy and the methodologies course. I personally feel that they are capable of doing this in the target language. I mean, there are always going to be students that switch into English no matter what, but it has to do also with how you construct, right, what it is that they're supposed to do, how you ask the questions, right, in when you gave us our assignment. But if you give them just some key vocabulary, I've found, because I've worked like this in class before, you know, many times, and I've found that it's that input plus one, pushing them, you know, a bit each way can work quite well. I feel that if you switch into the L1, and then let's say you come back into the larger group, right, in order to have that closure, and then you switch back into the L2, maybe it will work. I fear a sort of breaking of the rhythm. I would like them to be reading in Spanish, listening to each other, even though they'll make mistakes. As we know, that doesn't affect proficiency. It doesn't affect acquisition as much as people used to think it did. And then they come back and share. I think it can work in the L.
Yeah, I do agree. I really think it's true.
Oh, I was going to say, I think maybe too, it depends on the language and the level. You know, for a language like Spanish or maybe French or Italian, the students might be able to do that. And with more difficult languages, you know, that might be different at different levels. You know, another thing that I think about too, and this isn't necessarily specific to in language classes, but I've heard about some work being done about lowering the cognitive load for students when they are being introduced to new information. And this would be in content courses, not necessarily language acquisition courses, but allowing them to process in their native language lowers their cognitive load enough that they can, this is the idea at least, that they can acquire that content and then make the switch in the language. Now I don't know how that would be applied to a class centered around language acquisition. That would be, you know, allowing a student in an engineering class to discuss the concept in whatever, you know, native language. But my mind goes towards that, and I wonder whether there is something that can be learned or.
Can I say something on this specific point?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have been teaching a media class and a culture class, and I have two books. One is in English. They have to read chapters, like specific pages in English, and then they have to make a presentation and a summary in Arabic. And it works perfectly because they know what it is about. And then I post a summary in the target language so that they have also the terminology, since this is a content class. So they need to have you know, the words that it's hard for them to find the exact words, like by Googling stuff as they usually do. So I try to have all the keywords in my summary, and I make them read the summary, read the pages in English, read the summary in Arabic, and post a contribution to the discussion board. So that makes, I'm sure that they have read, that they have like issues and I have done it for my media class last semester. I'm doing the same thing for my culture class, and I find that it works perfectly. Scaffolding is really important in class. I don't let them speak in English. It's not an English class. They will have to speak in Arabic. If they're really struggling and there is something that I want them to put across, I will allow them just for a second to maybe summarize the idea in English if there is a problem. But I really think that it's not good to lower the expectations, because if you let them speak in their native language, they will never move on. I mean, even in advanced levels, like if they have the convenience of doing it in English, they will do it in English.
Let's say, like, so yeah, in the collaborative writing, I'm thinking about beginner, intermediate. Like, I mean, advanced could justify, like, all in the target language, but also, yeah, one thing before I'm going to give you an example. make sure that they write the exact same thing so that you don't have a dominant, partner who writes the paragraph where the other do not do anything. And often you can find priming effect, meaning that some students are going to write mistakes. And then when you go around and when you look on their writing on a Google Doc, I ask students to write on a Google Doc where I have access to, so that I can, see that they're actually working, doing the task. And then it allows me to see who gets which structure or not. So anyway, just to save a bit of time, I'm just going to go over like a very detailed structure for writing. So first, brainstorm what you can say about NOLA. Then brainstorm the vocab you can use to reactivate what the target vocab. Then write a couple sentences using complex structures. That's a strategy that I use a lot to make sure that, because you teach them relative pronouns, and might not never use relative pronouns in their whole life. So sometimes, I think there's a discrepancy between the grammatical content in the class and the actual use. So forcing them to use not a specific target, but asking them to identify a complex structure and use it, I think is a good solution. Instead of like saying, now write a paragraph using relative pronouns. No, try to think of complex, like using subjunctive, for instance, or anything else like that. Anyway, then write an outline to make sure there's an organization, that they plan ahead. Finally, write the text. So when they write the text, they focus on meaning, that like the festival of mistakes usually when they do that. I ask them first to proofread to check coherence and making sure that they use connectors. It's kind of like very natural in French. Then they have to proofread again using accuracy, and just to make sure that they do not write in vain, let's say, like in vacuum, I always add them follow-up activity. So usually I ask them to read what they wrote to a classmate, to compare what they did, or I use a grading rubric that I use when I grade the compositions, and they have to self-assess each other. So doing some peer review. All right, so now question. Is speaking, so at the interpersonal mode, like when they have dialogue, already collaborative, or do you think we can make it more collaborative? Just question.
Of course, collaborative.
Already? Do you think we could make it collaborative or not?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I do all the time. Like especially now with Zoom, it's you don't have any. You can work with them in class, and then they go practice. They can meet outside of class, practice when they're ready. I give them feedback in class, and then they post their video, and they can see if they have incorporated the feedback, and it's no time, no hassle. It's wonderful.
I think it's both. I think that they can be using interpersonal mode precisely in the small group work where they're putting together their list of characteristics about New Orleans, or in the project that you had given us previously, they can be reading. So they're also, working with that particular skill, and then writing. I mean, this type of project, this type of activity works in all the different skills. But I do think that interpersonal can definitely be part of it if you stick to the L2.
So yeah, so just to make things clear, maybe my question was like unclear, but so imagine you want to teach this activity, you're staying with the host family, and they ask you about your food habits. I always try to create tasks / activities, depending on your viewpoint, of something that is concrete. That is, so I never ask them like, oh, talk about your food habits. Like always trying to add something that is anchored in real life. So here is what I would suggest to do, and that's how I do. First, write with the partner. List the type of question the host parent could ask. Write some answers paying attention to grammar, maybe pronunciation. Practice both roles with your partner. And then that is like collaboration here. And then when they have to do that, play the scene, actually scene with a classmate. And that's how they check that they reach their learning outcome. There is, I can talk about my food habits. And then after that, they ask to give feedback on how the other did. So that basically why I think like, interpersonal mode is collaborative for sure, but you can make it even more collaborative by adding this preparation phase to ensure that when they communicate, they really have a sense of where they're going. All right, so I'm going to conclude now because it's been almost an hour. So numerous benefits of systematizing collaborative tasks in language. So first, it improves students' performance. All of the studies are unanimous on that, except for collaborative speaking, and I don't find any studies. And I also think like languaging is kind of an open door to inner thoughts. So when I go to the breakout room, I can hear them talk about grammar, about vocabulary. So it helps me to check the comprehension, the mastery of the course materials, either in the target language or in English. And finally, if you ask them to always collaborate for any activities, any task, then they stay engaged at all time, and there is always like a constant social interaction. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. And thanks everyone for joining us. We can stick around if you'd like to continue chatting. I'll leave the Zoom room open for now. Please mark your calendars for February 11th. That will be our next gathering. And I'll send out more information later, but good luck getting your courses prepared for next week. Thanks again, Charles. That was really fun and super interesting. And I'll stick around if anybody wants to hang out and chat.
Thanks.
Charles, I have
So how are you going to share the recording? Are you gonna email it to everyone, or do you have a specific?
I will. I'll email it out in the future. I'll post the links on our website. And Charles, you can probably stop the recording now.
Oh yeah. Well, except if like you have comments or follow-up questions, I guess maybe.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I came in late, but I don't know if you mentioned something about like the immersion style kind of teaching where the students take cues from actions that are, I mean, like maybe role plays, and maybe they take cues from physical object that they can see in the class. I've seen that this is kind of like very effective, especially in camps. So working with Tunica kids, I've seen that sometimes, we'll go into the situation without knowing any word. And so what you see is that, through the role play, through the words that they are using to describe objects, then you can take cues, from there and know the exact word, what that object actually is in Tunica. So I wanted to ask, do you have this kind of, style also incorporated, and how do you do that in a classroom setting that is not a camp? Yeah.
So I do not actually use this approach. So the way like my let's say like my curriculum is basically like a lot of can-do statements, from Act 4, and then I always try to have an activity that corresponds to these can-do statements. So it's always in a situation and so on. But I think like maybe that's something to look into and try to incorporate, and we can talk about that like later if you want to. I would be interested in knowing how you do that. So yeah.
I mean, I've always been fascinated by like its effectiveness in an immersion setting, but I was wondering how that could actually play out in the classroom.
No, I think like, yeah, we could definitely maybe like tie that with like some kind of collaborative, but yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that with you and to know more like how you use that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Charles, can we have access to your presentation part or all of it?
Yeah, I think like, I mean, I can also send my PowerPoint presentation to Adrienne, and Adrienne, if you want to like
yeah,
share
because
it.
I want to look at some things more closely.
Sure.
Charles, I was curious if Swain is the creator of the concept and the term languaging, because it's one that I've heard bandied about a lot in sociolinguistics of late. And so I was curious to see it coming from second language acquisition. And do does it, or is, I don't know who created the term.
So, I mean, I'm not familiar with it in sociolinguistics, but she coined it in the 2000s, basically. So I don't know if like maybe she used the concept and adapted to it. I mean, honestly, I was thinking why using languaging, like we would say meta-linguistic discourse, that's.
So it's a synonym of meta-language, right? From what I got.
I mean,
synonym, or is it used as a synonym of meta-language?
I mean, I think there are small nuances because it's like more specific, like, for my understanding again, but like, yeah, I mean, to me, why not? Like, you know, just, but I'm not really familiar with the term in sociolinguistics, and I would love
It's definitely not just meta-linguistic discourse in sociolinguistics. It covers far more than that. So
it's more, okay,
like,
okay.
it's clearly got different meanings in different fields. So I'm really interested to learn about this use of it in second
well,
language.
I can send the reference of the original use, because the reference I used in my PowerPoint presentation is like later on, like actually it was in a study on French. So yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I think that there is also kind of like another term that is closely related to it, which is translanguaging, and and I think the only difference that would, you know, have with regards to maybe code switching and so on and so forth is basically that you are focusing on the attention. I mean, you are focusing your attention on what people are doing rather than how they are doing it. Like if someone is switching between French and English, so you are not interested in the point of switch, in the point of, you are only interested in, you know, like what they are trying to achieve doing that. I don't know if languaging also has the same kind of, because I think translanguaging takes a cue from languaging.
Yeah. So languaging, basically, like the idea is just like, so you talk about basically language is more than that, let's say, but just, yeah, as a follow-up what you were saying about code switching, but Korean were asked to speak in the target language and not using Korean, so in English, and not using Korean during, like, you know, the collaborative writing task. And they said that they had the impression of wearing a mask when they had to speak English to another Korean person, that they were not being themselves. So that's also, like, you know, something is just like, yeah, I think it would be also kind of translanguaging. And that's also like something I've been kind of, you know, arguing. And I mean, I know like people do not agree with that, but are we teaching them to be monolingual or bilingual? And if we're teaching them to be bilingual, like, I think like going back from like the target language to the second language should not be like, you know, so taboo. But again, I think like when you're really like in immersion mode, like at advanced level, I will encourage that you do it fully in the target language. At the elementary and intermediate, I'm more flexible, let's say. I mean, elementary, like, yeah, I mean, usually they use English, but yeah, so, but that's also interesting, like, you know, this notion of translanguaging as well. Maybe that's something also to consider, actually, saying, let's pretend we're French, or let's pretend with like Spanish speakers, and let's not use English. That could be also like, you know, part of a role play or whatever. But anyway, yeah.
It's sort of a hot topic right now in heritage language learning, the translanguaging work.
Any last questions? Thank you so much for attending this.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian, too, for collaborating.
It was really fun. Thank you all for making time before the start of the semester, and hopefully I'll see you again on February 11th, if not sooner.